Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. My guests today are co-hosts of the weekly television program Gay USA, journalists Ann Northrop and Andy Humm. They've both been for many years the most important leaders and keen observers of the gay rights movement, which is what I'd like to talk about today. And I'm so happy that you're my guests.
Thanks
Welcome.
for having us.
We're happy to be here.
So yesterday was Gay Pride Parade, 43 years.
44.
It was the 44th, right?
Yeah. Yep.
You know, I negotiated with the police and the group at 43, the first one.
Thank you.
Can you believe that? I couldn't believe that.
And there were people in the parade yesterday who were in the first parade.
Yeah.
And they were afraid they were going to get shot when they were walking up 6th Avenue. They didn't know what was going to happen.
They didn't know what was going to happen, and they wanted everybody to stay on, you know, 2 lanes on the sidewalk, not to go on the street. The whole thing was, the major issue was the cops were sure they were going to wear masks. And in those days, I don't know if it's still true,
Yes,
a mask is illegal.
Yes.
And of course, so the whole thing. So 40, it's a long time.
Yep. Historically, we've come a long ways in that time that none of us would ever have predicted back then.
Incredible. Right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, last week were the Supreme Court decisions.
Yeah.
What does that mean for the future of the gay rights movement?
It means self-respect and dignity. It means the concept.
It made a difference, a real difference.
Enormous, enormous. It made an enormous difference for LGBT people ourselves, because we can now envision ourselves in a new way as equal. And I think we've gotten so used to discrimination and oppression over the years that this really is a new thought for many, many people. And of course, for straight people, this is a change in their worldview too. We have lived in a world where the only legitimate concept was heterosexuality. And to think of ourselves as a diverse population, and that all the parts of that population are legitimate human beings, is a new vision.
Ann and I met working at the Hetrick Martin Institute for Lesbian and Gay Youth back in the mid-'80s. And in those days, they would ask kids, about your future. And gay kids couldn't really imagine anything beyond 30. Whereas straight kids they knew their grandparents. I'll be doing this. I'll be getting married. I'll be doing that. But gay kids had no sense of the future, which really hurt in terms of them protecting themselves from things like HIV and all those kinds of things. So that's all going to change.
Why didn't they have a
because they had no, there were no images.
It wasn't the AIDS epidemic. Part of it was that.
We had a boss that was 50. They said that old man is gay. You know, they just didn't know that we were around. So now they do.
I see. You mean they had no history to relate to.
Edie Windsor, who won, Edie Windsor, who was the plaintiff in the defense of marriage case, striking, so she got her federal rights, and everybody got their federal rights in this country, is 84 years old. You know, and she came to all this late in life, but there she is.
And I think I read or heard her say that she remembers years ago when you had to pretend that you weren't gay.
Oh, well, please, we've all been through that. Yeah. But her great quote when she won this case last week, the press asked her about her history, and she talked about working at IBM for years and being closeted and lying to her friends and everything. And what she said was, and I had more than a touch of internalized homophobia, and internalized homophobia is a bitch.
Isn't that interesting?
My favorite word, but coming from her,
that is
really profound.
Well, you really have to think. I think we're feeling a little spoiled these days. We now have people out and visible in the military, in the arts, in politics. None of that existed all these years ago, and that's why people couldn't imagine themselves being gay or their future.
So what is the future of the gay rights movement? I mean, you have 13 states that now it's legal to get married in.
Plus the District of Columbia.
Plus the district. So obviously in those states, there are going to be campaigns.
There are campaigns.
Some of them will be harder.
Legislative campaigns. Maybe Illinois will do it legislatively by the end of the year. There are court cases like in New Jersey. So all that's going to be worked out.
Right.
Justice Scalia told the judges in those states, here's what you're going to write when you strike the law down in your state. He did. He was very upset.
He predicted this 10 years ago in the Lawrence v. Texas decision.
Right, and he was angry then.
Exactly.
But let's remember what Ann is referring to. The sodomy laws in this country, the anti-sodomy laws, only struck down in this country in 2003.
Yeah. Which means it was illegal to be gay 10 years ago.
This was a law supported by George Bush as governor of Texas.
Yeah.
You know, so that's how far we've come.
We feel extremely lucky to be alive at this time and to have lived through this transition. It's just amazing. What a privilege to have seen all this happen and be part of it.
So what is the future?
Well, some people would say boredom.
Because they don't have anything to do.
Well, because we used to be these exotic creatures and the promoters of a more liberationist lifestyle. And some people are really looking askance at the idea that marriage and the military are the vehicles to
right,
equality.
so we can get killed and you can have trouble with marital problems.
And you know, that we're going to get married and have kids and live in the suburbs, and they think, really? Is this really what we want?
Let's remind one of the unintended consequences of liberation is that, yes, kids can figure out who they are at a very early age. I mean, like 5, 6, 7, 8, that kind of stuff. Yeah. And they often live in hostile environments. We grew up at a time when we had denial. I don't mean we were hiding. We just didn't accept that this was us. We go, oh, I'm not that. Things are going to be fine. That can't happen anymore for kids. They're smart. They figure out who they are very early.
When you were growing up, did kids really know about being gay? Even though
only
you didn't
vaguely.
Fit
What they
into it?
knew was the language, the homophobic language, the slurs. So, and we've done a lot of training in schools and talked about our lives and explored this name calling. And so what you knew was the language that was in the atmosphere. And you may have known that you had some feelings of attraction to someone of the same sex, but as Andy says, you could not put 2 and 2 together and believe those slurs were you. So it took a while to figure it out. And
if you think homophobia is dead, I mean, we've had a crime wave against gay people in Manhattan this year, including a murder of a gay man on the street. So there's an intent, there's a lot of stuff that hasn't been dealt with. And it certainly hasn't been dealt with in the schools. How many LGBT teachers do you think are out in the New York City public schools? A handful. They're afraid of coming out. They're afraid of losing control of their classrooms. I mean, they might be out to their colleagues, but not to their kids.
And there's nothing in the curriculum.
You made me think of Mark Rubin.
Yes.
He was the first person who came to see me about gay liberation, and it was really amazing.
And he was very brave in coming out.
He was. He must have been. It was 1970. He was in 71.
What a tragedy. And this is what the right wing is still trying to stop. What a tragedy that our kids from the beginning are not taught that we are a diverse population. It still leaves kids having
Well, isn't that going to be part of the next stage?
Well, I hope so, but I think
it's going to be more normal.
It's going to take far too long to get there.
We can't assume that the gay rights movement is necessarily a progressive movement. Can you say that?
Well, marriage is a very conservative issue, and you saw a lot of Republicans latching on to this year, and conservative columnists like David Brooks, they say this is a conservative issue. David Cameron, the conservative prime minister, says, I'm for same-sex marriage because I'm a conservative. So yes, so there's no reason they shouldn't be for that.
Now, as an oppressed group, we have historically been a little smarter about issues and known about the intersections with things like the horrible voting rights decision by the Supreme Court last week or other oppressed populations, and we've formed coalitions and been more sophisticated about that. But as we homogenize, we're losing some of that edge. And to me, one of the great tragedies is the number of people who are ignorant of those progressive
I mean, when we talk about in the schools, homophobia in the schools, we still got racism all over the place.
Absolutely.
So it's not necessarily a cure. There's still lots of work to get done.
I sometimes despair of the human race, but...
So it can go. So what do you think?
But don't forget, you know, again, even in terms of equality on marriage, there is a long way to go on that in this country.
Yes.
And then there's always the rest of the world. You know, they had
some of which is ahead of us, and some of which is behind.
Latin America's ahead of us.
And then you have, when you're talking about families, you're still going to have the question about adoption.
Well, adoption is actually easier in this country than it is in some places around the world.
Isn't that a state issue?
When a couple of states realized that gay people and gay couples were adopting perfectly easily, they shut it down, although there's a fight about that too. But in Europe, for instance, adoption is one of the last rights we've gotten. But in this country, adoption has been much easier.
Gay people have been adopting kids in New York forever.
And giving birth to them too, by the way.
Sure.
And what about what was interesting also, I think we talked about it before, with the green cards that went to families, so that the whole, I mean, it's it's just, it affects everything.
Well, here's the thing.
It is partly into race, into immigration, into ethnic,
More
the whole
than,
thing.
more than 1,100 federal rights and responsibilities.
Edie Windsor did win federal rights for legally married same-sex couples. So if you live in a state where you can get married, you've got all those rights. But if you move to Florida, which doesn't have it, what happens to you? Some of those will follow you.
Yeah.
But right now, we're not sure about Social Security. Social Security determines, you get it based on whether the state recognizes your marriage
Was that right?
you live in.
It's one great thing about being involved in this for so many years is how interesting it is. And what we learned in the last couple of weeks is that the federal government is not consistent. The military, if you are legally married in New York, then and you're in the military, no matter where you go, you will have federal rights, because the Defense Department does not want to sort this out for people that they're moving around all the time. But the Social Security Administration, if you're married in New York, and as Andy says, you move to Florida or Alabama or a state that doesn't recognize your marriage, will not give you Social Security benefits. So one of the tasks for the Obama administration now is to see whether they can change that.
That has to be changed because it comes from a U.S. Treasury check. How can that not be?
Look, New York State, even where marriage between people of the same sex has been legal for a couple of years now, the tax department refused to acknowledge that and would not let people file as married couples.
This was when, and Edie Windsor was one of them. Before you could get married in New York as a same-sex couple, you could go to Canada, Massachusetts, Connecticut, get married, come back, and New York recognized it for all purposes except taxation.
The tax department just decided to be ornery.
Now they've changed.
Well, now that we have federal recognition.
No, up to once we got.
Couldn't the governor just say change?
That's when they changed.
Why didn't the governor just fire the tax commissioner?
It was written into the code. That's why.
Very, very 17th century kind of state.
So it's an interesting future.
It's all interesting. It's I can't imagine why people aren't more involved in this, because it is so fascinating.
You know, when we started, it was the gay liberation movement. Then
Gay Liberation Front was the first group after Stonewall.
Then you heard about the women were saying it's too macho. The lesbians are an important part of this thing, so you've got to include us, right?
Lesbian feminist liberation, and they were fighting lesbian invisibility.
Right.
But there were both male and female groups before Stonewall, too. The Mattachine Society, Daughters of Bilitis.
But what I'm trying to say is it's all expanded. So now we've got
LGBT,
lesbian, gay, bisexual, and
transgender, and transsexual, and queer or questioning, and intersex.
All these different
Spirited.
things. But if you read the papers, increasingly you're seeing stories about choice and trans and what kids are doing, and so much more attention to the fact that the world is filled with many different kinds of people.
How fantastic.
Well, that's the ultimate goal. And you know, somebody said to me yesterday when I was covering the Pride March, and said, this is the most diverse march in the city. Anybody can come. Who else has that on Fifth Avenue? Nobody.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've always welcomed everybody.
Right. So what are the things that have stood out in your mind as the most striking things that have happened to you since you've started this long journey?
Oh my God. Well, certainly ACT UP and AIDS activism was a huge, huge event in my life, and still is in many ways. So I don't want that history to be forgotten. I'm glad there were a couple of documentaries last year, but that history still has to be written.
Are there any groups that follow the kind of organizing and formula that ACT UP had?
Not so much, and I think that's a real loss, because that democratic organizing and that grassroots organizing, I think, is so important. But the whole marriage fight grew out of a grassroots movement. The leaders, so-called, the major organizations of the LGBT communities did not want to bring the marriage fight. They thought it was too soon, that we'd suffer big losses, that would be a setback, we'd be going backwards instead of forwards. But regular people demanded it, and that was amazing. People, Hawaii, Massachusetts, all over the place. And in fact, there were little instances of it earlier in Minnesota and Colorado and elsewhere. But it's real people standing up and demanding their rights, and that is the most inspiring thing of all. And we see it all over the world now. And that's what keeps us doing our show every week, because there's always something new and inspiring.
Right. I mean, the movies that are being made about ACT UP these days, United in Anger and How to Survive a Plague, haven't re-sparked a new AIDS movement. That's at the grassroots, although there still continues to be
Were you old
ACT
enough to
UP.
be around during ACT UP?
Come on. I was at the first meeting. Oh, why was I at the first meeting? I get a call from Larry Kramer, and he says, I'm speaking at the center tomorrow, you're coming. I said, Larry, I heard you speak two days ago. You gonna say anything different? Just effing be there. And he hung up the phone, and there I am sitting there getting lectured by Larry, and he says, we've got to do something different. We've got to get angry, and we've got to get out, and it inspired people to do ACT UP.
It was incredible. Anne took me to the first meetings, and
I took, yeah.
It's made such an impression on me, always.
And I took you to the big demonstration at Grand Central.
Right,
the
that's
big
right.
Die-in
It was
there.
unbelievable.
That was great.
Ronnie, I've been a gay activist since 1974 when I was president of the Gay Student Union at the University of Virginia. And still in the closet to my
So
parents.
1974. So when was ACT UP? When did it start?
87 it started, and it's still going.
Yeah.
It's still going in many places. It's not as big as it was.
You just had a big reunion.
Absolutely, 25th, 26th year reunion, because people still yearn for that community, and we miss each other, and we certainly miss those who have died, but we miss that
It had
activism.
such a brilliant, I mean, it was a very elitist group in the fact that everybody seemed to be very smart, is what I mean.
Well,
Is what I mean.
I knew a few not so smart people, but yeah, it was
But
very
elitist-
clever.
I don't mean
anybody
elitist
could
that
go
way.
and
I don't
anybody
mean
had
it
a
that way.
voice.
I don't mean it that way, but
that's
I
what
meant.
we've lost in the movements.
Yeah.
The groups that I was a part of when I came to New York, everybody had a voice, everybody had a say.
Yeah.
That's what you need.
Yeah.
Human rights campaign,
Right.
multi-million dollars,
more money.
hasn't
Horrible.
gotten much done, and
It's
you
money,
know, and
money,
nobody
right?
gets a say. You're a member if you're a donor. That's no
That's
good.
exactly, but that's the same with politics in general. I mean,
Exactly.
that's what happens in campaigning for all campaigns.
Yep.
It's the people really are left out.
Yes, and we hate that, and that's why we.
Well, if you Google you,
Yeah.
and I don't know about you, Andy, there's an oral history for ACT UP, which is, as far as I'm concerned, a primer for organizing, and people should read it because you guys should write something about.
Well, the ACT UP Oral
organizing and
History
doing it.
Project is online, and they've Sarah Schulman and Jim Hubbard, who do it, have interviewed well over 100 veterans of ACT UP, and the whole thing again is endlessly fascinating. And they have the video of the interviews online along with the transcripts.
And just as you are doing this wonderful TV show every week, we do a TV show every week where we're putting all this stuff out there. And I also write for the Gay City News
Yeah.
all the time. So we're trying to put it out there.
Yeah.
Google Gay USA.
There's no time to write a book. Time
No
marches
time
on.
to write. I just meant a little pamphlet or a primer or something. It's already written. Just take it out. But how do you get it out? Well, you get it out on the internet. I haven't yet adjusted to that whole way of organizing. What do you think about that?
I think it's great. It's shocking that you can actually make change by signing a petition online. Who would have believed
But
that?
there's no substitute for turning out bodies on the street and
Right.
to really make change.
And meeting in person.
Yes.
Right, and we see
Talking
that
to
all
each
around the world.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
Brazil, look at what's happening in Brazil is amazing.
Yeah.
When do they have the Olympics? Next year?
In 16, probably.
Yeah, the Russian Olympics may be a problem,
Yes.
the Winter Olympics next year, 2014, because it's taking place in a place called Sochi. And Russia has just passed a law, 436 to nothing, to basically ban speaking publicly about gay issues, showing any affection publicly, with big fines. It's outrageous.
Russia's very repressive, isn't it?
They just,
Gotten worse.
they just arrested dozens of people trying to hold a pride march in St. Petersburg. Arrested the entire parade.
So what do we do about that?
We keep shining sunlight on it. People keep speaking up. People keep embarrassing the Putin administration worldwide. And eventually, as has happened here and is happening all over the world, progress will be made.
Well, Obama took on the president of Senegal last week on
Yeah.
gay stuff.
Yeah.
And then the president of Senegal said, we're never doing that. And he says, what about the death penalty in your country?
Oh, no, we go from there. So it's all related or interrelated.
It is.
Well,
all
I
of
hope
it.
it stays interrelated. You know, I mean, you must remember from the old days, I imagine, when before people were really out, before Stonewall,
Right.
that a lot of people who were involved in social movements were gay, but they were closeted,
Right.
right? And now we've been able to express it for ourselves as well as for the other groups that we work with.
Right. Well, that's what I'm hoping. I would love to see the people who are in all these different groups. I mean, when are they ever really all going to get together?
I
How do
think
you
that's
get
a great idea. Let's have a meeting.
I mean, the NAACP
I miss
is,
meetings.
the NAACP is part of our, our coalition in a sense, and they're hurting because of the voting rights thing, and they're saying, are you going to be there for us in this fight?
Right. Do we have meetings and do groups get together?
Not enough.
And if you had groups, what group would you get? I mean, look at the women with the abortion legislation. I mean, now seems to be the only.
Well, the women's movement will
loudest
tell you, and particularly the breast cancer movement will tell you that they learned a lot from ACT UP about demanding more.
But that also had its problems. I mean, the breast cancer people and the HIV people, AIDS people were always, in a way, competing at the beginning for the same money, and it was always a.
But a lot of the
techniques
got passed along.
If we didn't let the Koch brothers keep all the money in the country,
exactly,
we might be able to get something done here.
Yeah.
So economic fairness has to be a fundamental issue across all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The issue that interests me so much is what goes on at state governments, because as we've seen how important that is.
Oh my God. Yes.
And well, just the redistricting at the beginning of the century is what's really made us have what we have today.
Democrats don't vote in off-year elections. In 2010, if you didn't, vote to elect a good state legislature, you got Republican lines for the House, which is why we have a Republican House.
Right.
People have got to vote in off-year elections, and was very, very sad for the next decade.
Well, it is, and it's going to be even sadder for the decade following. So I hope that, it's those kind of issues that I like to see get broader perspectives and bring in more groups.
I get excited when I see people rise up at the inspiration of someone like the woman in Texas who did the filibuster. And now we're talking about a real democratic revival in Texas. I would love it if people followed through on that. I think if you give them a little hope and you give them a little pathway, they can. So
that's what always is so interesting. When people really stand up for something and they go counter to the establishment or whatever their organization is, they become, in a way, the heroes, and it strengthens them. Why more people don't understand that?
Elizabeth Warren.
I don't.
But on the other hand, Chuck Schumer, who, is not terrible on everything or it, but he was the head of the senatorial campaign committee and sold the Democratic Party to Wall Street, and then we had no regulation. And that's why we have fiscal crises. So, people have got to wake up to this.
Then we have to have individuals, right? They have to be individualistic and stand up for some principles.
I was just chaperoning a group of 14 teenage girls at a golf tournament. Don't ask. But they asked me, I was asked to speak to these girls, and I told them all about my political life and my lesbian life. And I said, I was your age when I started getting interested in what was going on in the world. And the shame to me is that more people don't pay attention. And I think it'd be really great if you girls started paying attention to what's going on in the world. Well, one of them has now friended me on Facebook. One of them wrote me a note saying I had inspired her to think differently. So the possibility is there, especially with young people who have much better values and are more reachable.
You came from a very Republican family.
I did.
Did you come from a Republican family?
My mother went back and forth, but my father was a broker,
Yeah.
But I have two good Democratic sisters and two right-wing brothers.
So how do you account? I'm always interested. How do people get to think what they think?
Oh, being gay.
No, I got.
That's really part of it.
Here's what we're saying. Ken Sherrill, CUNY here.
Right.
Being gay is the biggest predictor that you will change your party from Republican to Democrat of any factor in life. Because you just can't possibly vote for them. They're being so horrible. So even though your instincts might be fairly conservative, you're going to vote for the other guy because, Mitt Romney could have gotten 25% more votes from gays if he had not been so horrible on our issues. And sadly, because he's terrible on a lot of other things.
Well, it's good because he didn't get elected.
And I would say some of it is my actually conservative heritage. One of my ancestors was the third Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. I was brought up to believe in fundamental constitutional values, even though my Republican parents didn't practice them. So if I was watching the civil rights movement on TV as a teenager, I was offended by that. And then I went to college and it was the Vietnam War and I was offended by that. And then along came the women's movement. So I've gone through these various movements just because I have this sort of arrogant sense of justice that gets offended.
Well, no, yes, it puts
Thank
us,
you.
No, it puts us outside the circle.
Yes.
And gives us perspective. So it's the best thing that ever happened.
So what happens to people who aren't gay?
Well, everybody
Poor
has
things.
no, not just gay. everybody has something. You know,
Yes.
break your leg and find out, you know, about you're all of a sudden disabled. Anything that puts you outside the circle gives you perspective and is good and connects you to all the other people who are going through problems too.
So you guys are really very optimistic about the future.
Both.
It
Yes,
sounds
no.
it. Doesn't it sound
Well,
it?
we still do what
Yes,
we do, huh?
Yes. If we
You know,
didn't, if we
continue-
didn't have that,
Yeah.
we wouldn't keep going in for 17 years of Gay USA and no end in sight.
Yeah. And you?
Well, 27 years. Optimistic? No, unless, well, I don't know about this country. I mean, you know, it's almost like, are we going to have a depression, a complete depression before people wake up and take their own power? I don't know, because I'm not that encouraged. I mean, we had that horrible crisis and nothing changed.
But so can we say that the gay rights movement has the victory the victories that have been presented to them show that things can change
Sure.
and that it's important that you always try to do
People power. Got to be people
And
power.
driven by individuals.
Yes.
You know, Edie Windsor couldn't even get married. I mean, she had to call up my friend Brendan Fay and say, I hear you're the guy who takes people up to Canada and gets them married. I mean, that's how she did it. There wasn't a group that helped. Well, it was Brendan's group, you know, but it wasn't a major organization.
But
And when she wanted to go to the Supreme Court, all the gay legal groups turned her down. She had to find an individual lawyer to do it for her.
So it is that whole determination and a sense of justice.
Absolutely.
You can do it out there.
So thank you very much, Anne, and thank you, Andy. And watch Gay USA, because it's
Yes.
going to talk about things other than just being gay, but it's got a perspective.
We have a
that's
very diverse
worldwide
audience.
thing.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ronnie.
Is there any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore? Please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.